right, welcome all to the Hearts of Iron 4 podcast. I have Peter here, the game director of Hearts of Iron 4, and we're going to have a little chat here and just hang out. Thanks for joining us, guys. Peter, say hi.
Hello, nice to meet everyone, and thank you for having me.
Thanks for doing this with me. I really appreciate it. My genius level icebreaker here is, why did you break my heart and fix the Anschluss exploit?
Right. Yes, I know it was close to a lot of people's hearts, the Anschluss exploit. And I mean, in a game that is as complex as Hearts of Iron, any grand strategy game really, the amount of interacting systems and sort of narratives that you want to tell the story for, it produces exploits like nothing else, which is why we sort of developed this subculture of streamers and influencers who take great pride in breaking the game in many exciting ways. We don't have time to fix them all, is the short answer, but some of them are really obvious. And I think the low-hanging fruit kind of things, like the Anschluss exploit, which is very obvious because a lot of people play Germany, it's right at the beginning, and you can jump your power levels in a pretty enormous way very quickly. So I think that was one of the more obvious exploits that we wanted to sort of tackle.
Yeah, I'm glad that you guys made that adjustment. It's actually one of my first videos, like second or third videos on my channel, was just explaining the exploit. But I'm like super happy that you did it now. I believe there's a YouTuber named Mon, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and he's a speedrunner, and this would be one of the things that he would use for the Germany speedrun. So I'm interested to see now that the game has changed, like exactly how we do the speedrun and things like that. So it gives us YouTubers something to figure out. So thank you.
Yeah, I hope it does. And I mean, people hunting exploits is a fantastic way of understanding if our game is working optimally. As I said, it's rare to find a situation where you can fix all the exploits, but if there are some that everyone's using, then that's the kind of thing that make you think, well, this is more than just a little side exploit. This is a genuinely broken point in the narrative.
And it makes sense from a historical standpoint, and then the Anschluss rush with multiplayer is now taken out, which is always controversial if you play multiplayer. It's always like, oh my God, Germany went Anschluss second, and so you get that world tension spike early.
Yeah, and it's hard to avoid that sort of thing. And multiplayer communities tend to create their own sets of rules for these things, which I think is really the only way that this can be managed. It's by nature, it's an asymmetrical game. You're not all starting from the same position with the same technologies and have the same opportunities and narratives available to you. You have very different starts. So somebody playing Germany is going to expand at a different rate to somebody playing Switzerland or Austria. So it really isn't possible to create a lot of balance there. And I think it's good that multiplayer communities tend to then make their own rule sets. Some of them are enormous, and some of them are just very basic because they're just playing among friends. But it's interesting to see them.
Yeah, and what was interesting for the audience, for the people listening, was I thought I had this game all worked out, and then I played a multiplayer game, and the level of depth. I mean, some of the players that I play with, I just sit there and talk to them before and after the games to start gleaning all this information. And I was like, how do you like know all this stuff? But as you sit there and play, you pick up a lot of things, and the multiplayer community knows all the exploits.
Yeah, I've tried playing multiplayer in pop-up games once or twice. I'm usually the lowest common denominator, though, unfortunately, so I tend to ruin it for everyone else.
So what do you mean by that? Are you saying that you just have insights behind the game, that you know how to exploit it more, or is it the opposite, that you're not used to playing multiplayer?
I'm not really used to it. Sure, I might know a lot about the inner workings of how the game functions and so forth, but I mean, when it comes to multiplayer, I don't know what is expected. And I think multiplayer communities often build up these expectations of things you're supposed to do, things you're not supposed to do, exploits that you're allowed to use and not to use, and then this idea of there being some sort of big meta which you have to chase. That is a bit alien to me. It's not something I do when I play single player on my own. But it's something that's very core to the MP experience, I think, especially amongst the hardcore players.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And that's what surprises people when they get into a multiplayer lobby, is that it's a pretty strict And then if you go against the grain, like, yeah, the team dynamics can fall apart pretty quickly.
Yes,
So,
and I mean, giving players more tools to maybe not remove the meta, because I think there will always be a meta, even if the balance is changed. Like, all you're really doing is changing the new optimum and giving players a chance to figure out what the new best thing is. But I would like in future development to focus a little bit more on things to have a more competitive meta, and I mean that in the in-game sense of competitive. What is good in one situation is not necessarily good in another situation, and being able to sort of counter each other through those needs is something I want to do.
So while we're on that topic, did you happen to see the last big multiplayer tournament? Feedback Gaming was live streaming it, and Dankus was hidden playing it, and Dankus ended up winning it was a no-air tank Germany against a USA. Dankus countered. Can you tell me about that mod? Was that mod developed by your team, or... Because I know you guys did the one that was the North Africa mod here. But yeah, tell me a little bit, expand upon what you just said a little bit, and did you see that tournament, and what were your thoughts?
I didn't see that specific one. I think I caught the end of it, possibly, and I've watched some of the other previous tournaments. I think Tommy K did something a while back, a couple of years ago. And there were some others over the years. And then, of course, the Speed 5 initiative ran their own tournament. And the mod they're using was made by them. I can't remember exactly what it's called. Commanders in Conflict, I think. That was a mod that was created for Speed 5. I don't know if that's what they were using in the tournament you watched.
It was, there was a neutral zone in the middle of the map here where what I'm showing on screen. It was Germany on one side, USA on the other side. Yeah, you had to at a certain time, you had to enter the neutral zone, and then the war would start, and there was a little bit of a build up. To war.
Well, that sounds like the Commanders in Conflict mod, which is, I think, the thing that the Speed 5 team, which is ex-Paradox folks, as far as I understand it. They built this mod for their own streaming purposes, but of course it's available on the workshop, so anyone can run tournaments using it.
Awesome. Is the Hearts of Iron 4 developer team looking at any changes to multiplayer at all? Any rebalancing, or is that kind of delegated to the modders and like teams like the Speed 5 team?
I think if you want to do a truly competitive multiplayer, you need mods. I think trying to do it in the vanilla game is just going to be an impossibility. That said, we're not delegating balance, but I think perhaps we have different aims in terms of what we're going for when we balance the game. I'm all for changing balance and introducing sort of new mechanics. As I said, I want to focus a bit more on a competitive rock paper scissors type meta for actual game balance. But that's because it really tells the historical story pretty well. It's not because it makes it more even or more fair. And I think the war in general was many things, but you can't accuse it of being fair.
Yeah, and I think about that a lot, and I guess the narrative that is portrayed by the media is that like Germany had a chance, but I don't think that Germany ever had a chance, particularly after Barbarossa. What they were going up against was just too vast, and it was just an inevitable walk to Ensig after they started Barbarossa, in my opinion. But that's great insight that I think that focusing on the historical narrative is a smart thing to do.
I wouldn't say that that means we're necessarily abandoning or just delegating off multiplayer, but it's a different beast, and we know our players like multiplayer. We think we have approximately 20-25% ish of players play multiplayer once a month or so. But the amount of people who actually play it all the time, that are what you would call a hardcore multiplayer audience, that's a lot less. So the vast majority of the multiplayer games we have are 1 to 3 people either playing co-op or just messing around in a game together with friends. And the big pop-up multiplayers that obviously are really fun to watch and be a part of if that's your jam. But the number of people doing this is tiny in comparison.
Absolutely. And thanks for giving those numbers out. I was really curious about the player base, the multiplayer player base, and I'd have to lend credence to that because if you're playing some of the mods, the players oftentimes want 14 to 18 countries with co-op. So maybe not countries, but just like 2 players on Germany, 3 on USSR. And so coordinating like 18 players in a game becomes really unwieldy. And there's not really going to be a workaround for that. You have to have everyone.
No, I don't think so. It's really hard to do, and I'm really happy that Hearts of Iron, which I mean, all of the Paradox grand strategy games historically were predominantly single player experiences, and I'm really happy that Hearts of Iron has taken off in the multiplayer aspect, and that people like doing this and that they try really hard. But we're also limited a lot by what the tech allows us to do. It's an ongoing discussion that, you know, Hearts of Iron has now become so popular to the point that for some reason people have decided to take it on themselves to build cheat programs and DOS hosters and that sort of thing, which I find I don't understand it, but at the same time our tech was not built with this kind of thing in mind, so work around.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. That, you know, when I started playing, it was like 4.5 or 5 years ago. When I started, I didn't even think that multiplayer was a thing unless you wanted to play like 1v1s. And then out of nowhere, I guess it was even a surprise to the developers that multiplayer became this kind of theater that people would watch on Twitch and YouTube. So that's very interesting, and
I'd say it's a pleasant surprise. And I would love to carry on looking at how we can better support, particularly the competitive multiplayer community. But it has to be balanced against the cost of everyone else.
Well, to throw my 2 cents in, the quickest thing, the biggest problem is the economy pre-war, because everyone says that they're not doing it, but they are. And the best way for the Axis to get ahead is to simply like civ boost Germany. And so if the economy, like the historical multiplayer mod does this, you can turn on a option to balance the economy till 1939. And I think that would clean up a lot of things because it's hard to police, because we have to police it ourselves in game. But that would be my only 2 cents for a quick cleanup of, you know, multiplayer.
I guess I would argue that at that point, why don't you just start in 1939?
So, okay, that is perfect, because that's what I thought. That was my counter argument in my own mind. So for whatever reason, people really enjoy the build up to war.
They do. And we have numbers that tell us that as well, for what it's worth. The 36 to 39 period is the most played, and I think there's a couple of reasons for that. I don't have stats on multiplayer versus single player, but we know people like that build-up phase. They play it repeatedly, and I think that's because at some point you enter the war and then it either all goes right or it all goes wrong. So so that's part of it. But they also engage a lot more with the build-up. Like, people love to ideological path for their country. That's the point at where you really choose the narrative that you're going to get throughout the game. And it's also where you do a lot of the gardening and the industry. So it's clearly popular to people. But I think also the reason it's popular is because you are deciding your path. And that conflicts a little bit with this idea of multiplayer, where we need everything to be super balanced and super strict according to expectations. Like, Turkey needs to have 9 factories, or Germany needs to do the following things, otherwise it's not fair, it's not balanced, it's not what people expect. And that's almost like turning off different aspects of the game in a way. And that's something we've experimented a bit with custom rules, where you can sort of force no war declarations at certain points, or force no ahistorical war declarations up to 39, and do various other things. But some parts of the game are harder to switch off than others, and I think turning off a core part of the game, like building factories and actually doing your industry, what are you then doing? I think at that point you're just choosing your focus path, more or less.
Yeah, absolutely. And the suggestion that I made was just for trade, and that does raise a good point of some of the mods. Some people might think overbalance the game. They take away focuses, they take away countries, they take away like the customizability for playability. So that is a balance that I feel that some of the mods are really good at. So yeah, thanks for your input on that. I really appreciate that insight. Transitioning, I selfishly am going to talk about this while I have you here, but I came out with a video today. I tested the game mechanic of in-game as Germany going free trade first or going war economy first. And I found that, so what you do is you go Rhineland, you get the political power, and then I just use console commands to up the war support to get war economy first. And it seemed that war economy after 70 days versus free trade after 70 days did absolutely nothing to my civ count by October 1937. And I turned the AI off, and I just wanted to see, is there a problem with the way I tested it at all? I didn't do anything but the Rhineland focus. I just built civs. Off the top of your head, like, did I do this test right? Or why isn't war economy more impactful?
I think off the top of my head, and I would need to see a lot more data to give you a good conclusion, but I would expect that a 70-day test window is probably not enough for these kind of decisions. They tend to be big long-term decisions. And I mean, if you've only got 70, I think, factories as Germany at the beginning of the game, the difference in things like consumer goods and so forth is small enough that often you're talking about less than a factory in total, or your build speed isn't going to be noticeable over a 70-day period. I think if you tested it over a couple of years, you'd probably see a bigger difference. And I mean, HOI is a game about snowballing. So any little gain that you gain at the beginning in the first 70 days is going to have a much larger impact to you 2 years down the line when you have the effect of that factory's cumulatively stacking up.
So I chose the economic law versus the trade law at 70 days, but I ran it for, till October, like a year and 10 months.
Right.
And yeah, there was still no, like, what I was expecting was at the end that if you chose war economy first, you'd have like at least a couple civs more than not going it at all. But at this point, I couldn't see that war economy it didn't even net one extra civ. So the snowball theory was out on that. Maybe there's something that happens when you turn the AI off, but I was attempting to turn off, the RNG that perhaps like countries could trade with me differently. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm going to keep on testing that mechanic.
I mean, if you have AI off and you have free trade on, they're not going to be buying any of your stuff. So
that's interesting. Maybe I'll, wouldn't that benefit free trade more then if
yes.
The AI so there may even be a greater boost to your economy if you just go free trade because you have more resources to market and therefore the AI will give you more civs. In theory? In
theory, but that's very dependent on the game state.
Oh boy.
And I think generating tension is the kind of thing that is likely to make that harder, and Germany tends to do quite a lot of that very early. So people are less likely to want to trade with you under those circumstances.
Wow, my mind is like racing right now. Like you just opened up a huge rabbit hole for me.
There's a lot of those in the game. But I mean, specifically talking about economy laws, this is something I'm not particularly happy with right now. The way that you can have consumer goods values that either have little to no effect or an enormous effect depending on how many you actually have in the first place. And that's probably something changing in the long run.
Interesting. Yeah. So based on the size of the economy, this either opens up a lot or does nothing for you.
I mean, it's the standard problem that most games, particularly ARPGs and strategy games, have with reductions to factors. So if you have 30% of something and you take away 5%, it's not a huge amount. But if you have 10% of something and take away 5%, you've just taken away half of the penalty that you previously had. And in the case of factories, which are discrete integral units, if you don't have many factories, 5% of your factories might be less than 1, or it might be 1, depending on rounding. But if you have 70 factories, 5% of your factories could be a lot. So it's really hard to balance that in a satisfying.
Absolutely. And I do, teach in my playthroughs, if you have a small economy, just ignore economic law. Because of that, 5% of nothing is nothing. Yeah, absolutely. That's interesting. That'll be interesting to see what you figure out there. Let's transition to a different topic here. I know you're not going to be able to talk a lot about content that you're coming out with. Can you tell me a little bit give me a background about like what you're doing to update the game for existing players? Is there anything in general that you could talk about, like what particularly you're looking at? You're talking about the economic law. Are there any other mechanics that you guys are looking at right now?
Constantly, I would say. And this is the big focus of what we were doing in the war effort patches, which started after the release of By Blood Alone. This initiative was born from the same recognition, I think, that spawned things like the subscription option. And the subscription option we released a year and a half ago, more or less, allowing you to sort of subscribe to HOI4 and get access to everything that we've released for, I think, $5 a month, something like that. This wasn't really a big profit building venture. This was something that was supposed to make it easier for people that were joining the game later in the game's life cycle to access everything without having to sort of pay for everything up front. And you see Reddit threads and forum threads about the price of Paradox GSGs, being several hundreds of dollars towards the end of their lifetime, and we wanted a way to address that. So, I mean, that's the first thing, making it easier for people to get on board. That's part business. And then there's a second part of it, which is the actual gameplay, and that's where war effort patches come in. We have all these different SKUs, different DLCs that you can buy. Some of them are older than others. Obviously, BBA, No Step Back, whatever the previous one was. These are newer. The content is newer. They have a different narrative feeling to them. And the type of content that we've released in HOI4 has changed pretty drastically from its inception through to now. Focus trees in TFV and Death or Dishonor, they look very different to what focus trees look like in No Step Back or By Blood Alone. People have different expectations. So the war effort patches are partially there to update older content to at least feel a little bit more modern. We haven't forgotten these countries. They're not just going to stay with the balance that they had when their content was released forever. I'd like to look at the game as a cohesive whole instead of just the new country has a new set of stuff and it blows all the others out of the water. I want to have a more consistent view of how each country's balance and narrative actually applies to the game. And as well as that, as well as focus trees and things, we're also looking into mechanics and balance. We're adding a lot of quality of life in these war effort patches as well, and that's something we probably aim to expand on a little bit when we go forwards. We're coming to the end of the war effort patch cycle at the moment for this expansion release. We can't do these every month for the rest of forever. We have to sort of take gaps here and there, and because we're coming up to summer and other things, which I won't talk about, then we'll probably be ramping them down. But they'll begin again at some point, and we'll get to see much more option for changes and new content appearing.
Yeah, and could you speak a little bit about what I'm always curious about is when you introduced the subscription-based model, did you see an increase in your player base, or how do you feel that model worked out?
I wouldn't say it's responsible for a big increase in players. We didn't expect it to be. It's an alternative model for people to engage with the content, and in that respect, I think it's performing perfectly fine. Some people don't like it. Some people do. The people that don't like it tend not to buy it, and that's fine because they have other options to do the same thing.
Yeah, and I like that. It's just having more options, as you just said, is to me a big bonus because, yeah, if they don't like my content, if they don't want to watch my content, no one's forcing them to watch it. So, yeah, it makes absolute sense that you go for the subscription model. When I saw that, I was like, oh, this is great. Particularly if a lot of your player base is just, or there's a portion of your player base that plays the game, then moves on to another game. At least they could play for a month or two and then unsubscribe. So thank you for that insight. What I wanted to ask you overall is, as a developer, what do you feel like from your perspective, what do you feel your job is? And kind of like, could you give us some insights on how your team executes that job? Because you have a very interesting job, in my opinion. And I would just like some behind the scenes insight into like what you do, how do you see your job, and how do you execute your job?
What I do, or what we do, I guess, as game developers is highly varied. Like most software industries, there's a lot of different disciplines. We have coders, we have content designers who work with the game script. We have artists, we have 3D artists, etc. We have these archetypes, these disciplines. And I think in any production industry, the ideas are the easy part, I wouldn't call them always easy, but if you want an idea for an expansion or an idea for a feature, it's fun. It's the 5%. The 95% is the execution, and it's making sure that you get everyone working towards a common goal. That's often the hard part, making sure they understand why they're doing what they're doing, structuring the process to get there, having enough opportunity to iterate on what you're trying to do. It's no good deciding that you're going to go in one direction and you're going to build the new supply system or something and then just sitting down and going for it. Using the supply system as an example, we had this idea that we wanted to redo it for No Step Back. We did, and at various points along the way we had check-ins and say, is this fun? How can we improve it? And it got perilously close to the end before we decided we're okay with this now. It was a difficult process, and I think the most difficult part of that is trying to telegraph to both the team and the players, like, why is this fun? What are we actually doing with it, and how can we make it apply in the best way possible to the fabric of the game?
Yeah, absolutely. And you guys had a great video that came out for April Fools, the future of HOI. Does this type of content, like I really enjoyed the By Blood Alone content that you guys released. Is this like more of a team building exercise for you guys? I know that the By Blood Alone release videos were obviously to share the game with everyone, but the April Fools thing, can you tell us a little bit about that? Was that video like a team building exercise?
We try and do an April Fools every year. Sometimes we put more effort into it than other years. It's been anything from a forum thread to a video to a meme post on Twitter or something. This time it was more, and I guess, yes, it's an opportunity for team building. You have somebody in the team that really latches onto the concept of, hey, this is a really fun idea. I want to take it and I want to make it mine and make it better than just a forum post. And we had that this year. So yeah, the team owned it. It's a sort of organic team building exercise, I suppose.
Any regrets so far with anything in the game development sphere? Anything that you added to the game or took away that you regret and had to fix, or anything about the game development that you regret?
Most certainly, but it's impossible, I think, in this industry never to make any mistake. Show me somebody who has and I'll show you a liar. I think BBA was a good example of where we changed too much at once without necessarily bringing anything new to the table. A lot of the criticism about By Blood Alone was around the peace conferences and around the new plane mechanics. And these are both mechanics which we changed, but which were already established. So you're changing player habits by introducing a new system over the top of an old one. And if I look back to the supply system again in No Step Back, this was also introducing a new system, but the old system didn't really exist. There was no real interaction. There was no established habit. So we could afford to introduce a lot of change here because it was creating new gameplay. It wasn't just changing old gameplay. And then in the plane rework in By Blood Alone, we obviously changed wing sizes. That was a very unpopular change, albeit for the good of the game, but it was changing something that was established and had a lot of gameplay already around it, at the same time as we changed peace conferences, which had an established gameplay and had expected outcomes, and we took some of those away to an extent. And I think that made a lot of people a little unhappy, and that's something we probably aim not to do again in such a wide degree in future, because it was a lot of change at once, and it was a lot of restriction on top of that.
Is this why you went to like the monthly updates? So instead of like having a release and boom, all these mechanics changed, you're instead trying to balance the game out like little by little?
I guess that's a side effect of it. I wouldn't say that's why we did it. I think why we did it is just because it's a clear and obvious need for a long lifetime game. It's not like an EA game where you release a big blockbuster every 2 years or every 1 year if you're feeling productive. These are games that live for, how long's it been now? 8 years, I think, for HOI. It's a long time, and it's showing no signs of going away anytime soon. It's going to be here for the duration. We want to support it for the duration, and that means actually not just pouring all of our resources into the next big thing, as profitable as that may be. I think it's also profitable to have a game that can last a lifetime.
Yes, and I think that like if you go to Steam charts, the top games that are played have been like developed over like a long time horizon. I can't even like some of the games, I don't even know what the time horizon is. Like you could say that Dota 2 was developed back starting in Dota 1. That might have been 20 years ago. I'm not sure, but Counter-Strike. I was playing Counter-Strike like, I don't know, like 20 years ago. And that is like one of the top games still. Is there anything that you guys are doing to, besides what you just described, to make the game last longer? Could you dig into that a little bit more?
I think people want more things generally, as simple as that sounds. Our releases are quite limited. We have small teams. We aim, I guess, to push out something on a yearly basis. Sometimes we hit that, sometimes we miss. But I would like to see more content for the players, basically. And I don't know if or how we can achieve that. But I would like to see more option for people. Yeah, we're doing pretty well there on the top charts. And it's slowly rising. And I mean, it's a living game. It's alive. We're going to keep supporting it for as long as we possibly can. And I think players like games that feel alive. They don't like games that get no updates, get no content, whether that content is just a small change to something or whether it's a big new expansion or it's a content pack. They like, and we want to give them stuff.
If we delve into here, like, you've given me a few ideas while we're talking, but basically, if you look at the last kind of huge spike, it was with No Step Back, and you hit the nail on the head. Like, you added something on top of something else that didn't previously exist. Perhaps that's a clue as to, instead of changing people's basic habits, which they don't like to do, as we all know, but in some cases it's good to change your habits, like you started going to the gym or something. Add something new to the game, because, like, in my opinion, the No Step Back was the best release. It made logistics for World War II make a lot more sense. Everything's going to be carried by train. There's going to be supply hubs. Not to get into the weeds here too much, but we've seen in Ukraine, you know, that blowing up the supply hubs is incredibly impactful to the war. I'm talking about like the HIMARS and things like that. They're targeting, you know, stockpiles of supply because it's so vastly important to destroy the opposition's supply. I'm really proud to have been a game developer, I'm sorry, a YouTuber covering your game development for what you guys have done. Like, in my opinion, especially the No Step Back, the logistics system is a genius level thing. And it kind of broke tanks for a while. But kind of from a development standpoint, when you add stuff to the game and then the game breaks, to me, it's a natural part of game development. But how do you guys deal with like the initial release and then having to like rebalance the game after one of your releases? Is it like a mad scramble?
Yes and no. It's inevitable that there'll be problems after a release. You can't release anything without encountering new bugs you've never seen before, regardless of if you throw the entire planet at it in QA. Balancing we expect. We don't aim to release things in a perfect state because we don't know what the perfect state will be balance-wise. We know what we want it for, but the players will often find ways of using a system or a new mechanic in a way that we didn't expect, or to do something. With aspects we didn't expect. So in the case of the supply system, they might be using it totally differently. They might be not engaging with half the features it does, but still expect it to work in some way. That's mainly why it's important that we actually have the release to see these things. We can balance things behind closed doors forever, but it's never going to shape up to expectations that way. And it's the same with exploits. You don't expect to find them, so you generally don't find them. And then they're found in the wild, then you might want to fix them if it's something that really impacts the narrative of your game.
So what do you guys as a team do if you can, like, I know this answer partially, but what are all the things that you do to get bug reports? How can people best report bugs to you? And then what do you guys do to like receive feedback and then act upon that? Like, what are the different methods that you use?
A bit of everything, really. I mean, the best way to get something into the system for us is on the forums, in the bug report forums. These are read and acted on. Personally, I also spend a lot of time browsing the various social media. The HOI sites, predominantly Reddit and the forums. And I operate a little bit outside the expected flow there. If something is wildly popular on Reddit as broken, need of some balance, then that absolutely does factor into how we prioritize stuff, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But ideally, it would be both of these things. If you really want an issue that you care about to be seen and acted on, post it in the forums. make a Reddit thread on it by all means. There's a chance I'll see it, but if it's not something that everyone cares about, then that's not going to make much of a difference.
That makes a lot of sense. So you're basically using, I don't quite want to call it an AI, but like a third party websites to, like, Reddit is basically a voting system, right? So if a thread gets a lot of views, likes, etc., it's going to rise to the top, and then you're going to know as a developer that this is important because it's popular.
Absolutely.
That is, I did not think about that. That is, I should probably use that for my content.
It's not an infallible system, I will say. I think particularly after the release of By Blood Alone, we had a lot of people that realized that these horrible peace conferences were great karma farming tools. So they'd make the most disgusting thing they possibly could and post it and say, look what the AI did. And we know they were doing this because there were some things that the AI were hard-coded to never, ever do, which often appeared in these threads. So that was a little bit disappointing, but that's the price you pay. Upvotes.
So if someone were to report a bug to you, what would be the ideal way that they do that? Like, do they do it on Facebook? Do they go to Hearts of Iron 4 Discord? What's the best way?
Our own forums, I think, in the bug reports subforum, or suggestions if it's not directly related to a bug. I read the suggestions forum a lot. That often inspires what we do in the Wareft patches. But in addition to that, I'd say the best way to do it is nicely. There is no substitute for being polite. And I think a bug report that uses harsh language and accuses us of being lazy is much less likely to get fixed than one that is, even if you think these things yourself, that is just plain language. Just don't use hyperbole. It's if you expose yourself to too much of that, days, weeks, years on end, life is no fun. You're going to stop reading bug reports that are like that.
Yeah, and I run into a bit of that with like the content that I put out. Immediately, like people don't understand, for your like mental health, if I start seeing like curse words in the comments, I stop reading and delete it because like want to be surrounded by negativity all the time, because for myself, like you just alluded to, like it does affect your mental health. So I guard myself against it. It sounds like you guys do the same. And this is advice for life. Like, you want to kill with kindness. If you're going to work and you're, negative to your boss is not going to think highly of you, and your career is going to be affected by that. So if you want something to be changed in the game, the best way is to really surprise the developers with how positive you are. And if you watch my content, I'm incredibly positive, but I will point out negative things, but not try to be overtly negative.
I think that's it, really. I mean, I don't expect people to be positive just for the sake of it. But if you have, as the saying goes, if you have nothing nice to say, maybe say nothing at all.
So when they post, I want to dig into, so they should have screenshots and then perhaps like a 2 or 3 sentence like explanation of what needs to be fixed. Would that be the optimal way when they post, or I'm sure
absolutely. There's a template in the bug reports forum that gives you an indication of what to do. Usually it's a screenshot if applicable, a save game. The most important one is the steps to reproduce. If you just point out something that is wrong, then someone has to go and work out how to make it happen. If you can tell them how to do that, then that saves so much time for everyone involved. And if you spend 2 hours per bug trying to reproduce everything, then you're not going to get through many bugs a day. If somebody shows you the steps to get to this state where it happens, or provides you a save game that is just before this issue occurs, then it's even better.
Okay, interesting. So before the issue occurs, so that you could see the build up to whatever the issue is.
Yes, that would be perfect. And mods, of course. We do sometimes fix issues and bugs in modded games, but it is obviously a lot harder to know if they were real or if they're caused by some poor mod interaction or are just something we don't actually support being used in the wrong way.
Yeah, that would be hard to sort out. And I would think that if you're using a mod, you should probably contact the modders first.
That's usually a good way of doing it. And we have a fairly open dialogue with the modders. We talk to them many of them regularly. Many of them are in our closed beta programs. So, I mean, if something affects them disproportionately, they have some bug that their users keep reporting to them, then they can talk directly to us and say, hey, this thing doesn't work as expected. Is this intended? Should we change it? Or maybe you can fix this.
Awesome. Okay. So yeah, on the screen, if you guys are listening, check out the video on YouTube. But basically, yeah, there's a bug report thread. And then the top thread is how to report a bug properly. So, wow, I didn't know that this was here. So thank you for giving me that info. I appreciate it. Transitioning to now, I kind of want to talk to you about, we're talking a little bit before the podcast that you used to play Eve. What is Peter's history as far as video gaming? I'm very curious as a game developer, like what type of games you played, and yeah, what's your favorite non-HOI4 game?
Gosh, well, I grew up in the 90s, like many game developers. So I played a lot of early-ish games, but I was always interested in strategy. And that's always been my thing, really. So starting on games like Dune, Command and Conquer, the classics, basically. Red Alert, all of these things, the Westwood Studio games, even more stuff. Crush, Kill, and Destroy, if anyone remembers that one. Ancient things. These days, I try and do the same thing, but I guess I play a lot of the Anno series games. Love those. Currently Anno 1800. I've always had a soft spot for games like Diablo, action RPG, loot, hoarder games, that kind of thing. Yeah, the Anno games are fantastic. I think I started in Anno 1701, probably. That's one of I first saw that series. But they're sort of city builder, it's crossed with European-style logistics management games. These days, with a lot more narrative involved. I play Path of Exile a lot these days. I went through my fair share of MMOs back in the day, so playing Eve, World of Warcraft. But these days, I don't have much time for that. They tend to be more drama than they're worth, having to deal with real people and so forth.
Did you ever play Civilization?
I do not like turn-based games, which I realize is a sin to say in some company. I've never been able to stick with them, with the one exception of Heroes of Might and Magic, which for some reason I don't see it as a turn-based game in the same way. But I struggle to get immersed in turn-based games, Civilization included. I don't know what it is really. I'm sure they're fantastic if you enjoy that sort of thing, but
oh man, you're breaking my heart here. So you don't like you never played Panzer Corps or the series either, huh?
I haven't, no.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, my roots are in Panzer Corps and Civilization. I think that Civilization 1 was the best game of its day, pretty much. And then it opened up the strategy genre, in my opinion. Like I would play that like I couldn't stop playing it. Like I was addicted to it back in the day, but all the Civ series, I played that, and all the Panzer Corps. So I guess I'm a turn-based guy, but
I think many people are, and I do play these for research purposes in many cases, particularly the Civ games, and then a lot of the military strategy type things. But it's not something I'd go home and play myself, generally speaking. I find it like wading through mud compared to playing a grand strategy.
You like the everything kind of driven and moving, and
yeah, it's dynamic, it's organic, it's alive.
And I think that's the sentiment of why, like, when you look at the Steam charts and the top 5 games are all like multiplayer games, I think that's probably the sentiment of most video game players.
Could be.
And it is, as Bitter said, the Hearts of Iron 4 AI sucks, but it is the best AI. So you can only play AI games for so long before you want, to maybe delve into multiplayer, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. Comments about AI are frequent on our games, but AI is either a challenge to you or it isn't, until you have something as truly seminal as a self-learning AI in a strategy game, which is a topic for another time. I could talk for many days about that. But until you get something like that, then the AI's skill threshold is more or less binary. You know what it's going to do, and either you can cope with it or you can't.
Are you guys doing anything? Like, I'm sure you've seen all these like Chat GPT, OpenAI things that are coming out. Is Paradox doing anything to perhaps get their hands on some of this technology and introduce it into a game?
It's definitely interesting. I think a lot of our disciplines are looking into ways that we can use it to sort of help us. Partly workflow, which you don't really see, I guess, as much in the end product. I think it's too soon probably to use this in a really obvious way in a game. We talk a lot about this, especially amongst the game directors groups, but I mean, the one thing that AI is embarrassingly bad at is AI. You can't use something like the modern neural nets things to actually create an AI that will play your game for you very easily. It's surprisingly ill-suited for doing that. AI needs to have a toolbox that it understands. So I think in either scenario, even if you build a self-learning AI, you need to spend all your time giving it tools and letting it understand the criteria for success, and then just letting it play the game a million times. It's not easy.
And I would assume that what applies for a particular game doesn't apply for a different game, correct?
Absolutely. It's very specific model oriented. There are several places where AI would be really interesting to implement. I know I've seen, I think it's Mountain Blade. We're looking at implementing, or it might even have been a mod. I don't have details on that. You'd have to look that one up. But I saw something about Mountain Blade having sort of conversational AI implemented in their game through I think ChatGPT or OpenAI something, where you can chat to characters in Mountain Blade and they will respond to you as if they were a real person. But I think these are more novelty than anything at this stage. It's a long way off being something that's sort of shippable and safe.
Yeah, so that's interesting that you brought that up, because I listened to a lot of podcasts about AI and things like that, and that is the only game application that I've ever heard mentioned. So what I'm thinking of is like a Skyrim type situation, and this is the type of situation that they were talking about. Dynamically, the NPCs will have dynamic conversations, because what I think the worst part of like Skyrim is you come up to someone and they say the exact same thing every time. Mm-hmm. So based on your interaction with that person, like there's a set dialogue, but what they're talking about is two different NPCs coming up to each other and having a conversation that changes every time you are a third party to view that conversation. And then when you interact, it's a dynamic conversation. And I think that this would be very immersive for that genre of video game.
It could be, and I would love to see more research into doing that. I think the obvious problems are that you have very little control over what goes on there. Restricting that AI vastly restricts its ability to improvise. And if you say, hey, you can't talk about this, this, and this, you have to pretend the following things are true, you're still going to miss some things. So people with the best or worst of intentions are going to find ways of exploiting the AI to talk about things it shouldn't know or shouldn't talk about.
And that is like what they talk about for like AI is basically people manipulating it to where it's like, we want to cure cancer, and the AI decides that the only way to do that is to just like off all the humans, then they can't get cancer. Like some decision tree like that, and that is very like grim, because the AI does not have feelings. So it is going to make logical decisions based on however you programmed it, I guess.
I am not an expert in AI by any means, but my opinion on this as a game developer is that there is a long way to go before we get AI that is going to be what people think it is right now. But we still have a lot of progress in applying what we have now to processes, things like building art or building AI-assisted art, AI-assisted voice acting, various production workflows, getting it to sort of schedule your meetings for you, things like that. That's using what we have now in AI really well, and that stuff is going to take off a lot in the coming years. But I think we're a long way off having an AI that can actually think. It's just really, really good at looking like it's thinking.
How about the aspect of, from a game development standpoint, having the AI start to code for you? Are we close to that at all?
Low-level things, maybe. It's probably quite good at providing you with established solutions to known problems. Once it has to start making intuitive leaps, absolutely not. I'm sure there are people out there that will try and prove me wrong. and you would probably be able to do so in extreme examples. But would I use it to replace a coder? Not in your life, and probably not in my lifetime.
So mainly the podcast that I'm talking about is the All In podcast, and it's like a bunch of venture capitalists, but they're very interested in AI because like the point of Google is like the deep mind. Like the founders of Google, the point was to create the deep mind AI and really foster that. But basically what they're saying now is from a venture capitalist standpoint, you would typically get like 10 coders together to start developing apps. And then your business grows, you get capital allocated to your company. And then essentially, they're saying now, because of AI like ChatGPT and the fact that the coders are getting to use these tools to code for them, a team of 100 is now a team of 10. Obviously, they're not developing video games that are quite complex, but they're developing like user interfaces, I'm sure, to sell products or whatever it is. Like, I feel like it's very basic compared to what you do. But just to give you an idea, that's what they're saying on this podcast, that the coding team becomes much smaller, and then the power of a small coding team gets amplified by some of these AI tools. So,
and that's why I think it's probably a good assisting tool if you need to solve a problem. But we don't have out-of-the-box products here. These are long-living projects. You can't bring an AI onto a project that already has an established code base and code standard and expect it to understand what it's looking at. So it's tricky.
absolutely.
I watch it with interest, but I'm not going to start putting my money on it right now. And I try to stay as far away from the venture capital scene as humanly possible.
Yeah, it's something that I am gaining insights by listening to the podcast, but it also seems a very, high stress.
It's a lifestyle.
Yeah, these guys play poker, and they're like, the crux of the podcast is like they make 20 bets to have one payoff and then get parabolic gains off of that one. And I guess what's intriguing to me about it is that's what you look for in video games. You're looking for that thing that gives you the parabolic gain. And you try out 100 things, 20 things, and then you find that one thing like going free trade first. And then that's your jam. Okay, last question here, and then we'll end the podcast. You seem like a fairly mild-mannered guy. What's the most dangerous thing that you've ever done?
Well, if I told you that, I'd have to kill you.
Okay, what's the most dangerous thing that you can tell me that you've done?
I'm not a risk taker in my personal life. I've worked a bizarre array of jobs, though. When I was 18-ish, I worked very briefly as a flight line mechanic on an airbase, and I was terrible at that job. Nearly managed to get one plane crashed. My own arm sliced off with a propeller. So that's why I work in video games now. That
sounds terrifying, to be responsible for something that flies and then almost having your arm chopped off. Wow. That's a good one.
At the young age of 18, I was absolutely not ready for that responsibility. So luckily, I had the insight to be able to learn that pretty fast and find some other employment.
I was not expecting that answer. That was a good answer, man. I don't think I've ever, had a risk of losing a limb. I'm a big time surfer, and I've surfed like, I don't know, I could claim like 15-foot waves, and I don't think I've ever come close to drowning. But I guess I'm sure some big sharks have been around me, like thinking about biting me. I've never been bitten, but I bet there's some situations that I don't know about or want to know about where there was a big boy, like a 15-footer next to me, and I just didn't know it. But I'm going to claim that that's my most dangerous situation.
No, that makes sense. And I think if I'm being a little more boring about answering the question, one of the biggest dangerous decisions I made was actually moving to Sweden. I didn't have any history in the games industry whatsoever and got a job at the time, growing but not massive company, Paradox. And I basically uprooted my entire life and career and moved to another country for this chance at a new career. And it worked out, thankfully. But that was possibly a stupid decision, but I was at the point in my life where it wasn't too late to make that kind of call.
Yeah, I mean, making risks young is what I feel you have to do, particularly if they're like educated risks. What was the thing that triggered you to do that besides losing your arm? Like, what was appealing about working for Paradox?
Well, this was actually a bit later than that, but I was a musician before joining Paradox, classical musician. I worked at a lot of cathedrals, churches, and I did a bit of teaching, recording, that sort of thing. And I had a not particularly rewarding but relatively stable career doing that. But I'd always played games, right? I'd always played strategy games. I'd always played Paradox games. And I applied on a whim, didn't get the job as I think a content designer at the time. I applied 3 times because I'd done a lot of modding in my spare time alongside all the music, and I got rejected 3 times. And then eventually somebody said, "Oh, well, we'll give you a chance. We need somebody to do some remote contract work," which was great for me because I could do it alongside my music. And I did that for a couple of months, and then eventually got offered a job working on It's a Boring Story.
I find it fascinating. I mean, it sounds like we're kindred spirits because I never had I never had experience in content creation till I did it either. But it sounds like you persevered, and perhaps you had no experience, and initially that's why you were turned down. But eventually you got that shot. Like, my first few videos obviously didn't do well, but I kept on going. But the thing about YouTube appealed to me the same way as your first Paradox job. I could do it while I do my other stuff. So wow, that's
It's
interesting.
a good route in. And I think the main thing is passion, which I think is a bit of a buzzword these days because people think game developers say passion and they mean crunch, which isn't true. You can have passion without crunch, just to be clear. And passion to learn is the most important thing. And I love learning things, new things. It can be new. It can be how to code. I learned to code since I arrived in Sweden. Not very well, I warrant, but I do it. And it's so fun actually just learning that thing and learning how new systems work and learning new parts of the job. I think that's the main thing that's going to help you go far in anything, whether it's learning how community content creation works, whether it's learning how to develop games. It doesn't really matter as long as you have the passion to learn. Knowing the thing in the first place is almost optional.
Yeah, I think about that often too. And I think that that's a good point. I was always taught by my father that, yeah, passion to learn will take you far. But I think that the discovery and exploration aspect is why we like video games, but you can apply that to your career as well. I've had several jobs that it was just like I did everything there, and it was just time to move on. You know, something new, I guess, something novel, and some new problem to figure out. I lost interest in the job, so completely makes sense.
And that's a good reason to move on, I would say. Some jobs you're in a state where you get there and it turns out that actually there is more you could be doing to learn. But it's always difficult to know, and there are various options open to you at that point. You can move jobs, you can side grade. There's a lot of things to do. But the one fallacy I think that you often hear amongst industry professionals here is that there's a right way into the games industry, and none of that is true. There's 100 different ways into the games industry. None of them are right. Do what's right for you, I guess.
That is, wow, we are kindred spirits. That's exactly how at my old jobs when I was a mentor, that's what I would teach people. The old Bruce Lee adage, way is no way. That's what I try to teach on Hearts of Iron 4 as well. There is no strict way to do it. And then when you find the incredibly successful people, you find out that their backstory was incredibly messy.
Always, yes.
For instance, to give an example that I heard on a podcast was Roger Federer was never supposed to be a tennis player. He actually had a host of other sports that he played, but he is not an example that stands alone. Michael Jordan was supposed to play baseball. He was not supposed to play basketball. So they say that a period of exploration is the most important thing to be incredibly successful. So, going around and playing multiple sports to find out that one sport that you're incredibly good at is the way to do it. Not to play one sport your whole life, but to explore. And then at some point your brain clicks. I guess there's maybe a set of skills that you learn across all these sports. And then for whatever reason, you become incredibly successful. I don't know. But yeah, thank you. I think that this has been a really great podcast. I didn't expect all the awesome insights. And I'm going to be intently watching what you guys are doing and trying to support you in any way that I can. So thank you for doing what you do. And if people want to check out the podcast, YouTube has now added a podcast category. I have podcasts with Bittersteel, Pigeon, and Pillbox 20 if you want to check that out on my YouTube channel. Peter, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'd be certainly happy to do this again at some point in the future.
Looking forward to it. I'll see you guys on the next one.